Welcome to the Sankofa Pan-African series. Please support us through Patreon and by buying me coffee so we can continue to bring you this series. Subscribe if you've not yet done so, and please turn on your notification buttons so you know when we have new episodes. And of course, share our videos with all your content. Welcome back to the continuation of my conversation with a Professor George Elliott Clarke.
Hegel said, world history is world judgment. And that's a profound statement too. So when we look at the way the world is constructed today, a judgment has already been passed on all of us. And that is the judgment of history. The judgment of history has been, for the last 500 years, that Europe will run everything. Yes, Europeans argue with each other. They go to war with each other. We've had 2 world wars. And what's going on right now, in my opinion, is and we got to remember, this is something that took me a long time to understand. I'm just going to say it. We all have life, our lifeline, our life expectancy is only, as the Bible says, 70. Anything over that, you're doing good. You're doing good. And you probably lived well too. You probably did all the right things, and didn't touch the tobacco and didn't touch the alcohol, and stayed away from dangerous sports like skydiving. So, okay, so you're doing good. But to get to the point here, most of us have 70 years, give or take a few. And what we don't understand, because of the fact that our lives are so limited temporally, is that the powers that be don't govern on the basis of 5 years or 10 years or even 20 years. They govern on the basis of centuries. They govern on the basis of centuries. So we need to understand that even though we all have horizons that are pretty close, the folks who are setting forward policies, and they aren't necessarily conspiracies, but policies, for the benefit of their nations and for the benefit of their continent, such as Europe, are working with timelines that are way beyond ours. They're hundreds of years. They're a century. They'll plot their nation's growth on a centuries basis, or on a couple of centuries, and that means that they can take a long view, so that even if on the short term they lose a war, in the long term, they're still benefiting. Yeah. So they take a long view on their own development. So what I'm trying to get at here is, for instance, while we are living still in the early parts of the 21st century, American policy planners are trying to create a world where America will still be the #1 nation on the planet. Into a century from now, into the 22nd century, and maybe even into the 23rd century. So they're looking at that far ahead, and when they're looking that far ahead, they got to also look at who else they have to potentially be in conflict with in order to ensure their own hegemony. So when the American policymakers are looking at the globe, just like the British looked at the globe before them,
Asia is a big threat to them.
They see Asia as a threat, and race is at the bottom of this. In one of my emails to you,
yes. So you're part of a group of poets writing on peace.
Yes.
And so I want to throw this question at you: is it actually possible to have peace without equality?
No, not without equality. I mean, we need all of the above. Absolutely, we need all of the above. But there are reasons for hope and optimism, but also just very realistic understandings of things. And for me, what that means is understanding that, unfortunately, there are those elites, and there are those rulers, and there are those nations who will stop at nothing to continue to have what they perceive as being their God-given right to lord it over everybody else. And anybody who complains can be threatened with nuclear weapons. And that's not just Russia.
Or
that's
pacify them with AIDS, with so-called charity.
Yeah, That's right.
just
And
yes, just keep them fed enough so that they can continue to exploit them, but not so much that they start to think.
yeah,
That they're equal
absolutely.
to us.
We have to understand that the world worked perfectly fine for the vast majority of humanity, and I'm thinking of indigenous peoples all over the world who were living in harmony with their environments,
the earth,
with the earth itself,
respect,
and the despoilation of their own nations did not begin until Europe came and said, "We're going to put a price tag on your sugar. We're going to put a price tag on your coffee. Everything's got to have a price tag. Your labor's going to have a price tag." And all of a sudden, you can't move, you can't do anything, you can't breathe unless you're able to pay someone. I love the idea that, for instance, people in Sierra Leone went to war against Britain because of the hut tax. The British had the nerve to try to tax the huts where people lived. Put a tax on them.
Nigerian women also went, they call it a riot, but we call it the Nigerian Women's War against head tax. It was like
exactly. How dare you? You didn't build that hut. You didn't build that house.
Did you build my head that you're taxing me to take my money to your country?
Yeah.
Our women rose up against it.
Powerful. And that's exactly the same kind of attitude we need to have. We should never have thought, nobody should ever have thought that just because independence was granted or that independence was won by struggle and by civil war and by revolution, that independence was won or that slavery was abolished. The mistake was to think that they had learned a lesson. The mistake was to think that they were now going to guarantee human rights and dignity and civil liberties and a fair price for commodities and so on. That was a mistake. They were never willing to do it. One of the things I've had to come to understand, given again the limitations of one's own lifespan, is that from the long view, imperialists think in long term. So they can actually surrender some right. They can actually lose a war. They can actually say, okay, you're equal for now, because they take a long view. So you think that you won. And they say, yes, you won. Look, Mandela is president now. You look at this. This is historic, blah, 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 blah. But the same old continues, and all you got is a show.
That is the story of all countries that were colonized in Africa, the Caribbean, and other parts of the world. The colonizers considered independence, but they built into the systems structures that would make us fail and continue to be dependent on them. And those structures that they continue to exploit, that we have not woken up, seeing that, look, this must stop.
Yeah, that's it.
IMF, the WTO, all of these structures, they're just there to keep us perpetually broke, borrowing, begging.
Yeah, or to simply always be worshiping them as supposedly God's gift to humanity. I was thinking about poor William and poor Kate and their visit to Barbados.
That was so beautiful.
And here they are.
Go on.
Lovely couple, future king and queen of England, but would like to be future king and queen of Barbados and future king and queen of the Bahamas and king and queen of Canada, and so on and so forth. And I'm so happy that the Bajans and the Jamaicans said, no, we're not
buying that.
Your time. We had 500 years to lord it over us. Yeah, those days are over. You can come back as tourists. Don't worry, we'll treat you well. We'll take your money.
We really have to think globally and think centuries ahead. It's not just about the battles. Continue to fight the battles today, but know that this war, cannot be won now, and it's a war that will keep going on. Ukraine is just the beginning.
Yes, it is. Ukraine is only the beginning, because people look at that and they say, "Oh, Clarke, you're wrong. Those are white people fighting white people. So
No.
you're wrong." And I
It's
like to
in the
remind
same
them,
space.
yeah, I need to remind them. I said, "Look, you think of Russia. You think Russia is a white country. Russia's not.
Mm.
Russia is Asia. It's Eurasia, but Europe is a small part.
Yeah.
Europe is a small part.
Yeah.
I'm going to use my stapler here. So this is Russia.
Mm-hmm.
This is the European part right here. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
The
On the
rest of it
other.
is Asia.
Mm-hmm.
So what Europe has never trusted Russia
Mm-hmm.
because Russia is mainly Asia. Russia is an Asian body with a white face
And
and
white rulers, traditionally white rulers.
white rulers. But
Yeah.
everybody knows, the rest of Europe knows that
Yeah.
behind the white face,
Yeah.
there's this Asian mass,
It is.
which
It is.
they do not trust, right? That's where the Huns come from, right?
Mm.
And so on. So
Mm.
the Western Europe has always had the same policy against Russia for hundreds of years, and it's containment. That's what the Crimean War was about.
Yeah.
The last time the Crimea was on everybody's mind was in 1856 when
Mm.
Britain went to war with Russia to control Crimea,
Yeah.
and then of course
This
ended up.
is still the Crimea, part of the Crimea War that is still going on.
Yeah,
It's
that's
like
right, because
it's never been done over for Russia. They've never given up.
they haven't,
Yeah.
because
And they won't.
the white European view of Russia is that it has to be contained because it's dangerously Asian. The other thing that they don't want is for Russia and China to actually join up, because that would be Asia and Asia, two major Asian powers being able to face off against Western Europe. So the war that's being undertaken right now, the proxy war of Ukraine, the West using Ukraine to fight Russia
Just terrible.
and weaken Russia,
Yeah.
is an attempt to basically prevent any kind of military union or alliance between Russia and China, to weaken Russia so much that it cannot pose a threat to the West. That's always been our attitude, even when Russia was the Soviet Union. That was always been our attitude from the West towards it. And it's always been the Western attitude towards Asia and Africa, is that they have to be controlled and contained. And we all see it. It's blunt, it's blatant. They're feeling so good about what they're able to do right now. They're feeling so proud about themselves that they can fly Ukrainian refugees who need a place to go, absolutely, into England, and fly black and brown people out of England to Rwanda. They're telling everybody.
I know, and pay them to just pay them pittance to take them in. Yeah.
And then they have the nerve to tell people it's not racism.
I don't know what else it can be.
And it's blatant. It's blatant. That's how wicked the man has become. I miss Malcolm X. I miss him.
I know.
Because he was a great geopolitical analyst. I part ways with him on so many things, on his misogyny, homophobia, and his anti-Semitism. I part ways with him. I do not support Malcolm X in any of those views.
Yeah.
But his geopolitical understanding was par excellence. He was brilliant in his analysis of world affairs. Brilliant.
There is not any one person, philosopher, great thinker, that if you read through their works, you will not find things to disagree with. So yes, he was wrong on so many things, but he was right on others.
Malcolm X said in 1965 that the two most important languages of the future would be Chinese and Arabic. He said that in 1965. He said in 1964 that the U.S. would be defeated in Vietnam. He was the first public figure to come out, and it was early 1964, and said the United States is going to be defeated in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And that the U.S. would never win another land war in Asia. They just left Afghanistan running. They just ran from Afghanistan. So, I defy them to show me where Malcolm was wrong in terms of those geopolitical analyses. And to build on those analyses, because he also took Du Bois as his base, that you got to look at where the color lines are being drawn. And the fact of the matter is that the game that's on, given the fact we have limited resources left in the planet, given the fact that the climates plural are being ruined everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
the West, which is Western Europe plus North America and other white-dominated states,
Yeah, Australia and so on.
New Zealand and so on, plus the North, economically, the North, their game plan now is to maintain their hegemony by getting rid of every potential threat. And
Yeah,
that would be Russia, China,
I know.
India,
Yeah.
and especially any possibility that these three nations in particular would join up as a new alliance,
Mm-hmm.
an alliance of color against the West.
Mm.
And their great weapon, the propaganda weapon they always use is, thou art bad on human rights. You Africans and you Asians, you are bad. You Muslims, you're bad on human rights. You's not very good on the human rights record. And all we got to do is dial back the clock. How far do you want to go? Do you want to go back to the 1960s and talk about segregation and apartheid and talk about second-class treatment, the massacre of Algerians in France in 1961? I mean, how far back do you need to go? What about the residential graves, school graves?
I know. Look at all that is coming up here in Canada.
This man should never be allowed to go anywhere talk about human rights until he learns to have some human rights.
Yeah, and then in Africa, they tie it also to corrupt leaders. Corrupt leaders who they prop up. So long as they do not argue with them.
They have no problem propping up dictators who do massacres.
The
yin yang, and they prop them up, and they're happy. They salute them.
Yeah,
they keep them in power. Then they stage manage their departures.
Yes. Oh, they come and monitor elections. In fact, the last elections in Nigeria, I actually heard the American ambassador to Nigeria. There was an election where the press actually saw people on one side of the road. One party was giving, I think, 4,000 naira. Another party was giving 5,000 naira, and journalists were asking the American ambassador who had been monitoring, so how can you say this election was free and fair? He said, we cannot absolutely say cancel the election because the level of unfairness is when you compare it to, the overall, and it just rambled on and on and on. And I was just like, wow, on TV.
Yeah. It brings back Frantz Fanon to my mind, and the necessity that if you're going to do decolonization, the first thing that the people have to say about their own post-independence governments is stop thief. Get rid of the kleptocrats. Get rid of them. And bring in people who are actually going to govern on the basis of what is best for the vast majority of the people. And especially in terms of ensuring that raw resources that are being sent out to earn income are actually going to be paid for appropriately by those nations that are seeking those raw resources.
And I know the few leaders who had those kinds of qualities, they made sure they destroyed.
Oh, yeah.
And the ones they left were those who, like in your poem, where you talk about dethroning monarchy to instill slave masters. That is the mentality of your average African politician. Okay, the British left, colonization was over, but it was their now turn to make all the money and lord it over everybody else. And it has continued till today.
Yeah, it has. It has. And
why else would Rwanda accept this kind of insane arrangement with Britain?
Well, it's like, I'm sorry for laughing, but it's sort of like Jamaica accepting to have a super prison built in Jamaica by the British. So the British could send all their Jamaican criminals back to Jamaica to a prison that the British built. But what the Jamaican government really needed to say was, you need to send us $100 billion to make up for reparations that were never paid to.
I don't know why we're not shouting enough about reparation. I don't know why.
It's like
How,
You know,
how many how many African leaders do you even see who know that we're owed anything?
that's right. And we are, because all the wealth of the North and the West was extracted from the South and the East.
Yeah.
All of it.
Yeah.
All of it.
All of it.
All of it.
Even most of our so-called radicals, our intellectuals, they don't see it as a priority, which is the sad thing, for me. There are not enough of us.
I think of Walter Rodney, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa.
Yes.
Right? The classic text. Of course, he was assassinated.
Of course. Yes.
Yeah. Probably by, I don't know for sure, maybe the government of Guyana.
Yeah.
Finally was able to get rid of him.
But
the ideas are there, and the facts are there, and the history is there for anybody who wants to read and become enlightened and then demand. And it's in the interest of the entire planet that people of color, the developing world, and our allies, white allies, in the overdeveloped world, come to understand that business as usual means global destruction.
Yeah.
And that if we do not want that to happen, we need to rein in.
Yeah.
We need to rein in these guys. And they cannot continue to talk about, well, we're going to have nuclear
weapons. Capitalism is on a rampage.
Yeah.
It has to be reined in.
It has to be.
It has to be.
Thank
you.
And I don't want to. The next time they talk about sending somebody to The Hague to stand trial for war crimes, I want to see George W. Bush right there standing beside Putin.
Beside Putin.
I want them standing together.
Yeah.
And they should be trying to defend each other, because they both use the same arguments. They both use the same arguments. They should be able to help each other out. Being put on trial. And Bush should be sent to the gulag in Russia, and Putin could be sent to a prison in Florida. Something like that. If the world had perfect justice, that's the way
the world had justice. Yeah.
And Boris Johnson too. I don't excuse him.
Oh, yes, he should be right there.
Oh, he should be. Yeah. I don't know what kind of put him in I don't know one of our penitentiaries.
I know.
He could go to one of our penitentiaries.
Yeah, maybe. And prisons in, I don't know about that part of Africa, but prisons in Nigeria are so horrific, that's where he should end up. Yes, where some of these.
You know what? You're right, because one of the arguments for integration is that it makes things better. So if we integrate Boris Johnson with a Nigerian prison, it'll bring up the standards of the prison. That's a good thing. He could get a Nobel Prize for that, Peace Prize for that. He could even volunteer. I volunteer to go and sit in a Nigerian prison in order to bring up the standards for all the prisoners. That's a good idea. It's a good idea.
It has been a fun conversation for me. It is not work at all. This is having fun. Thank you. Thanks for watching. Please support us through Patreon and by buying me coffee so we can continue to bring you this series. Subscribe if you've not yet done so, and please turn on your notification buttons. Don't forget to share our videos with all your contacts. And of course, keep those comments coming. Thank you.